and welcome to St Mary's University College in Belfast. I'm Gabrielle Nig Uidhir, and today I'm chairing the very first event as part of the Teaching Profession Project. This project has been established and is being developed as a resource for teachers. It provides opportunities to engage in professional discourse. It will also give opportunities for teachers to share their expertise and their insights with one another. We decided to begin the project with a focus on teacher wellbeing and with a short series of seminars. So here we are today. I'm joined by guest panelists here, and they will explore and help to unravel some of the factors impacting on teacher wellbeing and hopefully arrive at some strategies, some approaches and suggestions that will help teachers to safeguard their wellbeing. So let me introduce the panel. Here we have my colleague, Maria Stewart, who is an associate lecturer in St Mary's.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Maria's also a qualified and very experienced teacher, most recently as a special needs coordinator in her school. And it is Maria's work that we are considering today, as over the summer months she spent the time engaged in research into teacher wellbeing. So we look forward to hearing those findings. And Geoffrey, who is the principal of Pond Park Primary School in Lisburn. And Geoffrey's leadership role extends beyond the primary school, and he contributes to several programs in teacher education, is an associate assessor, and his service to education has been widely acclaimed. And Brenda Rankin, who began her teaching career, she tells us, as a primary school teacher, and but moved to post-primary and has spent much of her career in the Sacred Heart Grammar School in Newry. Brenda was head of drama and also had responsibility for teacher wellbeing and teacher staff development.
Yes,
Brenda?
as a senior teacher. Yes.
As a senior teacher on that team for the last 15 years. So, we have 50 minutes, let's get started. And I'd like to invite Maria to share insights into what we know from literature around the world. What is it telling us about teacher wellbeing?
Thanks very much, Gabrielle, for the lovely introduction. But yes, teacher wellbeing has always been an area of real great interest to me. Having been a teacher for over 20 years and a member of a school leadership team, there have certainly been times in my professional life where I have experienced work-related stress. And I know for me in those circumstances, my relationship with colleagues was a great buffer. So I was very much interested in finding out, was that common to all teachers? Were there also common triggers or stress points that teachers were experiencing? And about the other kind of strategies that teachers had developed to help them cope with work-related stress. And again, something else I wanted to find out was, is it actually an area of interest in research? So I started off with a systematic approach to the literature, and I used the database RefWorks to help manage the results. So after a rigorous search process and the application of several selection criteria, I came down to 101 pieces of research, and they formed the final narrative synthesis that makes up the article. So I was able to organise the findings under 4 broad themes, which were the factors that contribute negatively towards teacher wellbeing, those that contribute positively towards it, interventions that have been tried in schools to help promote wellbeing, and also implications that there are for initial teacher education. So in terms of the main findings, modern classroom environments, they are places where teachers are going to experience stress, and it's very important that they establish a healthy repertoire of coping mechanisms. And what I found in the study was that those mechanisms generally fall into 2 main groups. Those that deal with the cause of the stress, and then those that deal with the feelings that arise from it. But certainly the reports from teachers in the study were that they used a range of strategies to help themselves cope. They They use many different personal care strategies, for example, rest, relaxation, reflection, exercise. But the most significant factors that contributed towards a positive sense of well-being were interpersonal skills like resilience and also relationships. Not just those with their colleagues, but also the relationships with the students as well. I mean, we all know ourselves that, a sense of belonging is crucial. And certainly in school environments where there's a healthy sense of belonging, it's more conducive to learning, it's more conducive to collaboration between staff as well. But alongside that, teachers also need to feel as though they've got a sense of autonomy and some sort of input into the school level decision making. And also that what they are doing is actually having a positive impact on the lives of the pupils that they teach. Now, school leaders in particular have a very substantial duty of care here because they have to look after the general well-being of their whole staff, and they adopt very much a nurturing role, which is really relevant with regards to early career teachers because they may perceive themselves to have, a lack of knowledge or a lack of expertise in certain areas. School leaders also would have to look after teachers who are maybe returning to school after some sort of period of absence, or even those as well who've been placed in year levels or curricular areas, again, where teachers might perceive that they don't have sufficient experience. But school leaders too need to be supported in that role. For early career teachers, mentorship, I think, is a really strong strategy that could be used. And I know that's something, Brenda, that you will be able to expand on, certainly later in the discussion. And for school leaders, things like area or professional learning communities definitely offer those opportunities for collaboration between staff. But really, the relationship at the heart and the centre is that between the student and the teacher. And various researchers have pointed to that. The student-teacher relationship really is at the core of teacher wellbeing. One researcher, Geoffrey, describes it as two sides of the same coin, which I think is just a really sort of relevant, way of explaining it. And the vocational nature of our job, while it is a great source of comfort and a great source of worth, it can also be a source of stress too, because we're so highly invested in doing the best that we can for the children that we teach. But what I thought was really relevant in the findings of the study is that stress does not always equate to poor wellbeing. If teachers have sufficient strategies in place to cope with it. Now, as well as having those strategies in place, it's also important that that's married with drives to reduce common triggers and common causes. And I think we all know what they are. The usuals, disruptive pupil behaviour, excessive workload, lack of time, lack of resourcing. All those things can have an impact. But there have been a number of initiatives that have been shown to really help with that. Mentoring and collaboration, as we've talked about before, but also mindfulness-based interventions have consistently shown really positive outcomes, and programs too that use a range of wellbeing strategies. And I think that that's a really interesting point because it almost gives teachers then a menu of strategies from which they can select those that work for them best personally, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So something that works really well for one person isn't going to work well for another. So to provide a multitude, I think, is a really relevant starting point. And another key finding is that idea too, that there's no particular demographic of teacher that is immune to experiencing stress. All teachers at some point in their professional lives are going to have a difficulty in that area. So because of that, I feel then that points to a real need for initial teacher education programs to include emotional literacy training, so that teachers initial teachers, are leaving higher education institutions already with almost a toolkit of strategies that they can use to protect their mental health. But the most significant finding, from my point of view, definitely, was that there is a real lack of research relating to teacher wellbeing here in Northern Ireland. Of the 101 articles identified, only one included a sample of teachers from Northern Ireland. So I think that finding, for me, certainly indicates that this is research in this area. It's a matter of urgency. But hopefully, the findings from this study, along with the gaps that have been identified, might signpost a way forward for future research. I'm also hoping that some of the recommendations in it might prove useful to school leaders like yourself, Geoffrey, or policymakers who have an interest in promoting teacher wellbeing in their settings. I know for me, certainly having conducted this study, it really reaffirmed to me that attending to teacher wellbeing has to be a core part of what we do. It's not sufficient for it to be a bolt-on. And if we want to provide our children and our young people with the best possible education and the best learning experiences, then we need to get serious about looking after the people who are charged with delivering that, our teachers. And one way potentially that we could do that would be through giving teacher wellbeing a focus, making it, as I say, a core part of what we do, incorporating it into our school development plans, and seeing it as being a benefit in itself. Yes, absolutely. Teacher wellbeing is pivotal to student wellbeing. They're very much in coexistence. But it's important that we look after our teachers just for the sake of that too. And teachers as well, we also need to be sure that we look after ourselves too, that we don't work ourselves to burnout, that we know when it is a healthy time to take a break and to switch off. So in all, as I say, they would be the main findings of what I come up with in the research. And I really do hope that it does prove useful for practitioners out there.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for your hard work on this report and for your summary of the main findings there. I think you'll agree that it has to be useful. The wealth of insights into those factors impacting on teacher wellbeing and the importance of teacher wellbeing that you have covered are really worth further exploring. And of course, this report is available on our website.
Yes.
So teachers can access it there. Some hard copies are also being sent out to those teachers who have requested it. But you had referred in your report to reflection, and you've mentioned there about teachers having time to understand what works for them.
Yeah.
Whenever we talk about reflection in education, I tend to think of the reflective practitioner and reflecting on my pedagogy and not so much reflecting on well-being. So this really brings it home that teachers need time, space, and that is actually being built into initial teacher education. That opportunity to reflect and to discuss with peers what causes stress, what strategies work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And sharing those experiences too, Gabrielle, I think is really important.
Yes.
That, our initial teachers, early career teachers, and right the whole way through, that we have those opportunities to actually have supportive discussions with one another and to normalise that process of asking for help and seeking advice from others. Taking the shame out of that practice, because I think sometimes people can see that almost as being as a sign of failure.
Yes. Brenda, you had mentioned in our discussions before today, when we have been talking about this topic, you had mentioned about this very point about taking the shame away from dialogue around well-being. We're opening up that discussion today.
Yes, I agree. I do think that possibly younger teachers, you know, when in my role as teacher tutor, when you say to them, ask if you need anything, you know, we would always say to our students that asking for help is a sign of strength,
Yes.
not of weakness. So we've got to say that to the teachers. And the problem is that when an older teacher, a more experienced teacher needs help, they're probably less likely to ask for help because everybody's looking to them because they're experienced. Yeah. And I think that care certainly is essential for the early career teachers, but it needs to be extended to all teachers as well. And there needs to be a change in culture that it's really healthy to work together, to ask for help, to reach out, to collaborate. And I think that this dialogue should certainly help to, you know, change that culture and remove the stigma.
Yeah, thank you. And Geoffrey, as a principal in a large primary school in Belfast, you're...
Lisburn.
Sorry. In Lisburn. I imagine that you can resonate a lot with what we've heard here from the academic literature around the world.
Absolutely. I read the research several weeks ago, and I suppose when you put teacher wellbeing into context, what alarmingly strikes me is, and I quote directly from research, that the teacher is the most decisive element in a child's schooling. That is a worry, and whether well-being is negative or it's intact, the bottom line is it will impact on the experience of the children and whether they experience success on a daily basis. I dip in and out of a book called The Magic Weaving Business by Sir John Jones, and he actually talks about this kind of teacher who has switched off, has disengaged, has lost the heart, and he talks about this teacher just basically turning up every day, attending, clocking in, clocking out, but actually no longer making a difference. And as a school leader, it is my highest calling to ensure that is not the case in our school. I suppose in my role as principal of a large primary school, pivotal to that is nurturing all the staff, teaching and non-teaching, of course. Not just through the day-to-day humdrum of school, but actually I suppose really in life itself and all the bumps along the journey, because in your staff room you have mums and you have dads and you have brothers and sisters and partners, and I have experienced many times staff who have come back from significant bereavement, loss, trauma, divorce, separation, and their very first day back in my school is the day that they will actually remember. And I feel as a school leader that, and I hate the term back to school interview, but that back to school interview has to be more than that. It has to be where you're really meeting that teacher at that point of need, and that it is meaningful, and that you will see them through that. I'm also conscious with regards to positive well-being that as a leader, I am absolutely imperative in the pace in which I drive school. And we all talk about school has become so busy. We naturally get in first week in September into the fast lane. But I don't think that's good enough. I think as a school leader and school management teams, we need to look at the pace in which we drive school development planning, the school diary, the number of evening events that we have in school, the residential, and those things will either swamp staff, and if they're paced inappropriately, of course they will. I suppose just wrapping up at this stage, I do believe key to teacher wellbeing in my school, and I know I'm speaking on behalf of us all, is the quality of relationships. When all is stripped away, that to me is absolutely key. From the moment school opens until shut-up time, that we have reciprocated respect for each other, that those conversations, formal and informal, are based on high levels of respect and taking time. And I do practice actually physically keeping my door open most of the day, unless I do have to close it for privacy or for a conversation. But I do think it's important that there is accessibility and availability for someone to talk to. And that's not always easy in a school setting, but your research gave me great food for thought, and certainly as someone who is experienced, I found it to be really, really invaluable, and I certainly will take lots from it.
Excellent, thank you. And at that point you make about pace, actually, Geoffrey, I think is really, really relevant. Because I think sometimes, you know, if an initiative is put in place, unless it's partnered, as I say, with those efforts to kind of reduce the causes or the trigger points, you're in a position whereby teachers are going to interpret it possibly in a negative light, despite it actually having the best intention. You know, I think at best they'll consider it tokenistic. At worst, they'll see it as something else to put on their list of things that they have to do. You know, so I think initiatives have to be partnered, as you say, with real sort of systemic and structural change too. And that'll have the best outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for those insights. You emphasise the quality of relationships as pivotal in that the whole school well-being. And Maria, that arose in your work. You know, that was very prominent, that teachers had identified, especially newly qualified teachers.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the initiatives that came across as having excellent outcomes in terms of improving well-being were mentorship programs. Mentorship programs, you know, as well as being seen as an opportunity to increase professional capacity for that beginning teacher, you know, where they could learn and develop new skills. There were also great gains in confidence for the mentors as well as the mentees, because it reaffirmed for them, you know, why they were doing what they were doing in school. And for the mentors too, it was almost sold as an opportunity for them to develop those kinds of management skills that might go on to prove useful to them in terms of further career progression. So it appeared to be, you know, a win-win.
Yes.
In all respects, most definitely. And I know, Brenda, you have experience, certainly, of mentorship in schools.
Yes, certainly. In my role as teacher tutor, and I've been teaching for 36 years, I still feel like a very young teacher, although I'm not. And I've loved every stage of my career. And okay, there are the ups and downs and the stresses, but the relationships have been the things that have kept me going, the colleagues, the relationships with students as well. It has been a wonderful job, but I've recognised the past couple of years huge challenges for the newly qualified teachers. Now, I know we've all been impacted by the pandemic. There's an increased sense of isolation. Morale is at an all-time low in all schools. And I think it's because we're not used to being isolated as teachers. And due to social distancing, I know our staff room has room for about 100 staff, but we had to reduce the seats and the tables to about 20 to adhere to the social distancing. So you now have in all schools teachers, sadly, having break and lunch maybe in their classroom, in small rooms, in prep rooms, in storerooms. And I do realise that is, to put it in context, that's an exceptional circumstance. But into that mix you add the newly qualified teachers arriving to start their career, and it's been really difficult as a teacher tutor to give them that sense of belonging, that sense of team. And so, I mean, I always see my role more as the mentor initially than just the teacher tutor in charge of induction and early professional development. And it was interesting, in last month's ASCL Leader, they talked about the early career framework having separate roles, so having a designated mentor for teachers separate to the induction teacher. But I've always done that. I've always tried to make my role as teacher tutor a nurturing, mentoring role. And then the induction and the EPD comes after that. But if you establish that nurturing role and those relationships and that supportive environment for the new teacher, then they're more likely to be at ease working with you throughout their early professional development. So just, it struck a chord with me when you talked about that sense of belonging, Geoffrey. So thinking about a few of the things that I would do to try and settle in the new teachers. If I have new staff, a few new teachers in the school, we would ideally meet as a group because there's great solidarity and companionship. Some years there's only one new teacher, and you would work with the head of department and colleagues in their department. But while we have formal meetings, informally, I would try and connect quite regularly with new teachers, even if it's just going having a cup of coffee with them, dropping into their classroom. And I'm a great believer in leaving people notes and cards. Like in a day, in an era of emails and texts, never underestimate the power of a handwritten note. I'm a big fan of post-its, so your new teacher might find a post-it in their desk at the end of September with a smiley face. Well done, you've reached the end of the first month.
You've survived.
When it gets to Christmas, there might be a chocolate Santa or a chocolate bar attached to it. Just anything to make them smile, to make them feel welcome, and then to reinforce with them that, you know, I'm always here, your heads of department. I mean, some of the feedback I got in the past year or two from new teachers, they talked about times when I arranged for them to go in and watch another teacher teach. And I would often do that in a subject that's not their own curriculum area. Just if I know that there's a teacher who will be inspirational.
Yes.
And I remember with one of the younger teachers, I arranged for him to go in and watch a lesson with a teacher who was about to retire. And he was so enthused by that. You know, and this notion that you should stay within your department. I know it's different in primary school. I think there needs to be much more collaboration between departments, and that has worked for me. I think in your research, Maria, I found it fascinating, and I particularly noted your mention of the vision in the strategy for teacher health and wellbeing in Northern Ireland, that valuing teachers as individuals. And I believe that's at the very core of our work as teachers. I mean, we support our students pastorally. We do everything we can to find out about the students, to be there for them. We need to extend that to our teachers. And well, I like people. I like getting to know people. I like knowing about the families and the interests and the hobbies of my colleagues. So I suppose for me it's about balancing their privacy with my interest and my genuine caring. So I do try and get to know the newly qualified teachers. But, you know, I would always say little things count in school.
Absolutely.
You know, it's the smiles on the corridor. You should never be too busy to stop for a moment, to talk to someone, to listen to somebody. I have just recently retired, just a few weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Just moving into the next phase of my life, and I was overwhelmed with the response that I got from colleagues. Some teachers who have started teaching recently, others who've been there for a long time. And one teacher thanked me for always asking about her children and remembering their names. These are her son and her daughter. And I would take that as a given, that, you know, you would remember the names of the children of your colleagues. But what struck me was, you know, I was just asking out of interest, but the little things that really, really matter to staff are
They make a
important.
difference.
Yeah.
They're so meaningful, and you know, showing that you're making an effort to get to know people. It's like with your pupils as well, getting to learn their names.
Like we all need that, and being positive as well. I mean, I know schools are wonderful places. They're so diverse and vibrant. Not everybody is a happy, positive person, but I really do believe in the power of positive thinking. And you talked about mentoring and modelling. We all need to model positive behaviour for our colleagues, but also for our students, and that enhances that student-teacher relationship. I mean, I'm a great believer in the physical environment in school being enhanced by, say, for example, brightly coloured notice boards. I would have our staff area, our staff study and quiet room. I would have lots of motivational books and literature. I've brought a few to show you after, but The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. I have a book of self-care, John O'Donoghue's books, which are very motivational and inspirational. So in our staff study, I would try and have some sort of self-help things like I have these finger holds of one here. I don't know if you've ever come across this, managing emotions with finger holds. I started having these in the staff study for teachers to use with their class in the event that a child had a panic attack. Yes. And then I realised that a lot of teachers were saying, that was really useful, can I have some more of those? And what struck me was, if you are having a bad day, if you are struggling with your mental health, you maybe are not in a position to go and ask for help. But if you have accessible resources, some positive motivational cards and books around, then they're going to be useful. I even have mindfulness colouring books and colouring pencils. There's no point in having a colouring book if you go and find the pencils. But what I have discovered is that there was one teacher in particular. You talk about coming back to school after illness or bereavement, Geoffrey. It's really hard to go. And I know from personal experience, we all suffer bereavement and trauma. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I would have coped coming back to school without the compassion and humanity of colleagues. And that counts, that really counts. Absolutely. And this one teacher who came back after illness, she had over 20 years experience. She was not going to ask for help, but she had a loss of confidence, low self-esteem, and she confided in me that on one particular day she was on her own in the staff quiet room, and she picked up the mindfulness colouring book and she coloured in for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was enough to just ground her. So simple strategies, things that we might look over and think, oh, I need to go on a course and I need to get an outside speaker and I need to go to counselling. The simple things work with staff, and that just has been my experience. Yes. You know, that self-nourishment. Put on your own oxygen mask before you help somebody else. We're no good to the children or to our colleagues if we're not looking after ourselves. So I could talk all day about this, but I know we don't have time.
We could listen all day, Brenda. Thank you for sharing those ideas. You know, very creative ideas, and clearly you're investing in the space, in a supportive space for people. But there are common messages here coming through loud and clear. You know, all about relationships, listening out, looking after one another, supporting one another, and that is being led from the top, as you described in your own school, Geoffrey, by having the door open, and that in a metaphorical sense, to being open to...
It's a visual reminder that there's someone there, and as you say, Brenda, it is the small things that matter. I mean, like the colouring book, popping in the bar of chocolate, the bunch of flowers on the first day back. Those are the things that staff will cling on to when they're having a dark day.
Absolutely.
So as much as there's many strategic things we can do, I think all leaders should start small, and those tokens, when they reciprocate, you get it back sometime, you know.
And probably, you know, you don't need an incredible amount of investment in terms of funding or resourcing as such. Probably the biggest investment that you can make is in terms of your commitment. You know, just being cognizant and being aware of your colleagues around you.
Awareness,
Someone else recently raised that point to me about teacher wellbeing, and what was needed was commitment and resources. You know, that some of that commitment, as you say, is the resources in your staff, in their values, those values that draw people into teacher education in the first place and that they bring with them. But then you do need resources as well to make sure that it's built into your development plan and embedded in the whole school, as you say. Shall we move on and hear the voice of our teachers?
Yes.
We have teachers who have sent us some questions and some observations. So thank you very much for doing that. And we can only... the panel will only be able to discuss a few of them, but the rest we will share with you on our website, and you'll be able to realise that you're not alone in some of these situations. You will identify some of them as being relevant to yourself. So the first couple of questions are actually from two newly qualified teachers, and they seem to be in different settings, very similar in terms of they're in their second year, they're in temporary contracts, but one says, I think having a sense of belonging to the school is important for teacher wellbeing, for example, through team development activities. So it's a very simple sentiment, but there's so much in there that this newly qualified teacher, she is on a temporary contract, but the school is obviously helping to make her feel that she belongs. The other newly qualified teacher, similarly in a second year as a substitute teacher, but more fragmented. I'm grateful to be in constant employment, but without security or feeling like a permanent member of staff, this can be stressful. I know I will eventually get a permanent teaching post, but how can I protect my well-being at this time? Geoffrey, you must come across this in your school with the demand for substitute teachers, and we have a large number of substitute teachers on the teacher register.
Absolutely, and I suppose I was fortunate. 100 years ago, when I got my first job, it was a permanent
Yes.
contract, and I had that sense of belonging, I suppose, from those early days, and I did feel I belonged, and I had a fabulous mentor in my first teaching post. I do feel for those students who are dipping in and out of schools, and a day here and a day there, and obviously with the current climate and culture, you could have so many young teachers coming in. I suppose, truthfully, I say to them, this too will pass, and I always say to new teachers coming in, make sure you do make a difference when you arrive. And I do, when I can, meet young teachers on their first day. It's not always practical or possible if it's been an emergency call in the morning, but and I know Brenda has a similar setup, that we do actually give them something, you know, to say, look, big setting, big campus here, please don't get lost. Here's the washroom, here's the staff room. But generally we would always have someone, because of the site of our school, where a colleague across the corridor will have their door open, and you'll always have that go-to. But I understand that it's very easy to be down. You've studied for 4 years. All you want is your name on the door. And I remember that joy when I was a new teacher. But it is a difficult one, and I suppose all we can do is, in those short moments of engagement with those teachers, that we encourage them. And at the end of the day, when they're leaving, thank them for the work that they've done, and tell them to keep in touch with us, and ensure that they've done a good job too, and left an impression.
Yes.
Because that's the CV you will keep at the side of your desk for the next day.
Yes.
Brenda, have you?
Yeah, I think
experience?
it's very challenging for substitute teachers coming in, young substitute teachers. One thing that I do is I have a staff handbook as part of my role as teacher tutor, and I have 3 versions of it with 3 different cover letters, and they're always accessible. Because the substitute teacher coming in, it's a busy day. They could be in 9 different classrooms in a post-primary school in the one day. There isn't necessarily the time. I try my best. Someone would always meet them, a senior teacher, in the foyer. Then they get the staff handbook. And in the staff handbook, it's very practical, because they can't go and get logged onto Sims. So, you know, all of the documents that they're going to need for that day, every school's different. The bell rings at a different time, break is different time, lunch is at a different time. And when we're used to the procedures of the school day, we forget how challenging it is and how out of depth a sub can be. So in my handbook, I have the breakdown of the school day. I have a list of who's who and what they do, so they know who to ask if they need something. Details. You see a new sub teacher coming in clutching their own mug and nervously looking around saying, where do I sit? How do am I allowed this tea and coffee? So I would include that. There's the tea, there's the coffee, here's what you do. But we always make sure someone meets them. And if everyone is going to class and there's no teacher to show them around, I would often go and get one of my senior students to take them to their room, and then arrange for a teacher to then show them where the staff room is. And that's particularly for substitute teachers coming in. But in terms of the other point we talked about, Gabrielle, the team building and that sense of being a part.
Yes.
There's one new teacher there has obviously been integrating well with the school, and I would say that school offers a lot of activities for teachers. Those things maybe haven't happened as much due to the pandemic, but I think we're in recovery now, thank goodness. Some of the things that I do, being a drama teacher, theatre trips very regularly, several times a year. Theatre trips open to staff, all staff, not just teaching staff, and we would sometimes go for a pre-theatre meal. Now, not everybody goes to these events in the evenings, but we would have up to 40 staff attending. We would have Pilates classes weekly, walking groups. So all of these things, if they're available, then, and you can encourage, I would encourage as a teacher tutor, I would specifically invite the new teachers to join in, because it's evenings like that, or out for a walk, or at the Pilates class, that you get to know the people around you, the personalities.
Yeah. There's a question here you're going to love, Brenda.
Oh, is it?
Yes. it's from a school in Dublin.
Okay.
And situated by the sea, and the teacher here first shares some of the activities that little clusters of teachers in the school engage in, and then she hits us with 2 tough questions, so get ready.
Okay.
But she begins by saying, our staff are privileged. We are on the coast and practice sea swimming sometimes at 6 a.m. or 4 p.m. after a day's work.
Impressed.
We work out at a boot camp on Monday evenings. At weekends we have cocktail evenings. We also practice Tai Chi every second day. I think you might relate to that, Brenda, with
certainly
all
would.
the drama activities and arts activities. So not every teacher is engaging in this, but clearly it is something that this teacher feels makes a difference and is helpful. The questions that she asks, firstly, could you provide statistics on the best wellbeing initiatives? Evidence, please. So, Maria.
That's a tough one, definitely. First of all, could you say I would love a job in that school by the sound of it? But yeah, evidence. It's lacking. Yes, while certain interventions like mindfulness-based interventions have been shown to have positive outcomes, I also need to address the limitations of those studies, in that the evidence that was collected was generally collected very quickly after the intervention. So there's no sort of measure as to the long-term impact of it. Did teachers continue sustaining and using those practices after the intervention ended, or was it just forgotten about? So to say, there's a lack of long-term measure, but there's also a lack of measure with regards to how it impacts on the pupil as well. And I think that's a significant gap in the literature.
Yes.
How do teacher wellbeing interventions translate into improvements in pupil wellbeing, and then hopefully into measurable outcomes, through improved academic performance. So certainly they are big gaps in the literature.
And you do touch on that in the report. Your comments there bring us back to earlier conversation around reflection and teachers having time to reflect and to work out what are the strategies that work best for them. So there may not be a ranking of this for you at present, but there are some thoughts about that. The second question, can we make it compulsory for teachers to do a monthly course on mental or physical well-being? What do you think?
Maybe not monthly. I mean, all the evening activities, of course, are compulsory. Maybe not monthly, but I really do believe that coming from the EA or Department of Education, I think that at least one of the Baker Days or staff development days should be devoted to staff wellbeing. And I know, being part of the leadership team, each year you plan ahead for your staff development days, and you submit the topics that you're going to cover. And there's almost a sense, I think, with principals that they nearly have to make an excuse if it's a day that's just devoted to well-being, whereas I think that should be the priority.
Yes.
And I'll just give you an example from a few years ago. I was asked to take on the role of planning the PRSD for the year, and I decided that we'd had several years of IT training and lots of things like that. And I decided that it would be really nice if we focused on mindfulness for our PRSD. And when I discussed it with the then principal, she was very supportive. Then I realised I didn't have much mindfulness training, so I signed up for a course, which was wonderful, 4 consecutive Saturdays, and I found it personally enriching. And then I planned a staff development day where we had mindfulness training, we had laughter yoga, we had, in the afternoon, we had reflexology, head massage, and I had no problem about describing that day and putting that down as a team building, staff development, wellbeing day. But what struck me was that we were almost asked to justify why we were doing that.
Yes.
Our staff still talk about that day. And while, for the person who asked the question, while I've no research-based evidence on the impact of wellbeing, there's no research-based, anecdotally, I know that teachers are happier following engaging in a day like this, and happier teachers are calmer teachers, and calmer teachers, again, back to modelling positivity. So throughout that year, every teacher engaged for their PRSD in mindfulness activities with their form class or with a class of their choice. And it had a huge benefit on the mental health of students as well as teachers. So I think if this needs to come from the top, prioritising well-being, having a designated mentor, as you had suggested, Maria, in your recommendations, but also devoting some staff development time and not having to make excuses. It's really important.
That message is coming through clearly, that teachers would like well-being to be more formal, more structured, and to be supported, within in an official context, rather than just voluntary or as it happens to these interest development schools or interventions emerge or whatever. So teachers are calling out for that integration into the development plan in a real meaningful way. But I have to ask you, Brenda,
Yes.
give us an example of laughter yoga.
Well, laughter yoga, there are silly little activities and role play, things that just make you laugh. There was one of the exercises I recall going round where we were pretending to drink a cup of tea. You had to walk around and make eye contact. It seemed very silly. Everybody felt silly, but I'm telling you, laughter is very, very good for the soul. And I think we don't have, there's one of the books I share with staff and students. I don't know if you know Edward Moncton's Pig of Happiness. It's about a little pig who decides he's fed up with everybody moaning. He's going to just be happy all the time. And his happiness leaks out and seeps into everybody else. So if you haven't seen the book, you can go on YouTube and Edward Moncton reads it. But I really do believe that laughter is very, very important, and humour. And I would be a great one for sharing humorous memes and putting nice motivational, inspirational things on the plasma screen, and just, everybody needs a laugh.
Yes.
And I think we underestimate it. Children need that as well. So that sort of positivity. So the laughter yoga, it wasn't for everybody. Not all the staff liked it, but I did ask them all to give it a try. And if for no other reason, we have laughed about it since.
Contagious.
Yes.
It was good.
Could I bring our attention back to the newly qualified situation? Because there is a comment here that a teacher has taken the trouble to send in to us, and I think there's a lot of wisdom embedded in this comment from a teacher who's only in her second year and has just got a permanent job. She says, as a newly qualified teacher, a method I use to protect my well-being is making time to continue to do things that make me happy. It's very easy to spend all your time planning lessons, making resources, falling into busy life of teaching, but making time for hobbies is vital. I still make time to play Gaelic and coach, as it gives me time away from school pressures, and I get to see my friends. I've been lucky enough to get a job in a school with lots of other newly qualified teachers. That's a bit like the school that you're referring to. All the same, all these teachers feeling the same pressures and demands. Talking with them has made the world of difference. Lastly, one thing I found the most challenging, but also the most beneficial, is confiding in my head of department and asking for help. Now, to have learnt that at this early stage in your career is going to be so helpful to this teacher. She does say it is easy to feel like a burden and to put pressure on yourself to have everything done and perfect, but that's never going to be the case. Teaching is an ever-learning job, so reaching out to those around me has definitely made it easier to cope. A lot of wisdom in this message from this teacher.
Really insightful. You know, that's somebody who has a real good grip of how they can protect their mental well-being.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the first point that she makes with regards to still continuing with their sport and her coaching is excellent, because I think sometimes in teaching we see this notion of working ourselves to death almost as a badge of honour. You know, if you're not doing that, you're not doing enough. You know, so to actually have that awareness at that stage that you need a balance. You know, the time off the job is vital and important. Just to, you know, basically press a reset button and just put yourself, you know, back into a better mental state. One way that I would do it myself is I do a bit of sea swimming, and that's on a Friday afternoon. And I find what that does for me is it demarcates the working week and the weekend. You know, once I go into the water and get over the cold, come out, sit and have a coffee and a chat with friends for a while, the stresses and the pressures of work have left my mind. And it sets the tone for the remainder of the weekend. So I do think as well, we need to be personally responsible too. We can't always expect other people to work to protect our well-being. We need sometimes
It's our self-care, back to that.
Exactly.
Yes.
But those boundaries got very blurred. They certainly did for me, particularly during the pandemic. Working from home, there were no boundaries. So did you manage to keep up that sea swimming then?
I did, yeah.
Well done.
It's actually it's went on the back burner slightly in the past couple of months with being back to face-to-face teaching and things just being full on again. But I'm determined I'm going to get back into the swing, definitely.
Yeah, I think for me, walking and nature, just being out in nature, walking along the towpath, climbing a mountain, just being out, because it is very difficult. I found my job in the past few years became a 7-day-a-week job, because when you're on Teams and all the students and parents then have your email, I was getting emails possibly on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock, and because they were coming up on the iPad or on my phone, possibly an email from a student who was worried about a piece of homework. Now, I know I asked myself, right, if that student in normal times was worried about homework over the weekend, they would wait to Monday. So people say, oh, don't answer work emails at the weekend, but the pandemic was an exception. There was obviously a child who was concerned. So I would respond if I saw the email and just suggest to them very gently to shut down the computer. Don't be doing any work tonight. You need your rest, and don't do that homework for me, and let's talk about it on Monday. So I think we need to model for the students in a period of remote teaching. But that's where I could see with colleagues contacting me, trying to manage teaching from home tutoring their own children. It was just a huge task for teachers. And then a lot of people complaining, oh, schools aren't doing enough, or there are too many live lessons, or there aren't enough live lessons. That's not from my own school, that's from all schools, just friends who are teachers. And that feeling that, you know, you can give no more, but what you're giving isn't enough. So teaching as a profession, you know, people love to run down teachers, and that's something young teachers have to get used to. We need to, you know, reignite that pride in our job, that we do a good job, and you know, that pride in the profession, and that's why I'm so delighted, Gabrielle, that St Mary's are starting this initiative, this support for teachers as professionals. That is vital, because there's only so much abuse you can do.
We are very happy to do so. You know, it is just part of our whole ethos, which is all about service. And we have wonderful partnerships and relationships with schools. So to be able to give something back, and of course we're learning like all about this. What we're talking today about wellbeing is very relevant in teacher education as well. Could I move on to one other question here from a principal, Geoffrey, that you may have some advice for. What manageable strategies would you suggest to support wellbeing in a small school with a teaching principal, composite classes, and all teachers, including the principal, holding multiple coordinator roles? I nearly need to read that again, but you know, that's a tough situation to be in.
Absolutely. I do have the T-shirt. Because I was a teaching principal as a young teacher in my late 20s, and I understand what that walk's like, and it's a post that there's a huge imbalance, because first and foremost you mustn't let your eye off the ball with regard to the teaching element of it, but at the end of the school day there's everything with regards to management, safeguarding, governors, policy. If I was to do it all again, I absolutely would try to develop that professional learning community. 25 years ago, I was appointed a teaching principal. It was very much you in your small corner. We weren't very good at sharing. You know, schools have really improved with this collaboration and reaching out. And I have a fabulous partnership with 3 other schools. It's nearly 5 years old. And we're all successful schools, but we're only as good as we were yesterday. So we have this engagement. Our staff know each other. We have joint Baker Day in one of the schools a few years ago with over 100 staff. And that, I suppose, journeying together. So for the teaching principal, I would say do find a like-minded school. It doesn't have to be down the road either.
Yes.
You know, we can all communicate remotely, but visit each other's schools, introduce key players, introduce staff, share policy. It is a big borrow steal world too. There's nothing shameful about looking at planning, looking at an aspect of the curriculum, sharing your school development plan. We all do that, and as I say, there's that's a positive strategy. So again, that the learning community, which of course we probably are all engaging in, not just through shared education, but sharing pedagogy, sharing really good practice, and cherry picking the bits that you know you can bring back. And I have the role of being an assessor for ETI, and the best part of that job is going into a school and saying fabulous things to, dare I say, steal and bring back to school. So
no, you may not say, Steve.
I do empathise with the post holder there. Check in on your own mental health and make sure that there is balance there, but link in with other schools.
Hopefully that's very sound and helpful advice. I'd like to wind up with a short comment from a teacher in an Irish medium school, actually, and it just, you have all touched on this in your approach of dealing with people in your own schools. So research shows that acts of kindness are beneficial for the mental health and well-being, not only of the giver and receiver, but also of anyone who witnesses them. Kindness can reduce stress as well as improve mood, self-esteem, happiness. We may not know what our colleagues are struggling with, so we should always approach them with kindness. Now, I did think of that whenever you were talking about your relationship with your staff, and when you were talking about the response to the student who contacted you late at night, kindness itself. So that's a good way to wind up the questions. And as we draw to a conclusion here, I'm going to ask the panelists to offer one piece of advice that they would like to share with teachers that they think may be helpful. And while they're thinking of that, I'd like to flag up to you a deadline, a date in your diary. So 7th of December, that's when we will have the second seminar in our Teaching Profession project series, and the focus will be on literacy, the science of literacy. Don't forget about our wellbeing book that is available to you and is also available on the website. Brenda.
Well,
10 seconds.
I would say the most important thing to me is to recognise the power of positive thinking and to never lose your sense of humour, because even on your darkest days, a laugh will help.
Thank you so much. Geoffrey?
You've stolen mine.
Oh, sorry.
What I would say is to staff, experienced and inexperienced, there is always someone on your team that you can go and knock a door to. Don't ever be frightened of failing. Be open, be honest, seek the help. We've all done it. We've all been in those shoes. I ask for help every day in my job. So reach out and don't suffer within the confines of your classroom.
Thank you very much. And Maria?
Absolutely, and my point actually be very much the same, to be honest. Just to make sure that you check in with colleagues, that you don't let kind of the busyness of school life take over. Make sure that you pop in, you ask people how they are, how they're doing. And I think another thing that's really important is to share good practice.
Yes.
If you come across something that is working really, really well, shout about it. Let other people know and let them join in.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Maria Stewart, Geoffrey Cherry and Brenda Rankin, who have generously opened up their own experiences and shared with the wider community of teachers their insights into what helps with well-being and what the risks are to watch out for. So please do take this discussion into your staff rooms, get it onto agendas, and we will be with you again in a couple of weeks' time. Watch out for our website where you'll get further details. Thank you. Take care.